Juniper and Marigold, June and Mary, they were called. Twins, born on the first day of September, just 2.5 years older than me. In our quiet stretch of rural Wisconsin, the three of us lived under the watch of towering pines and shadows that clung to everything. Our father was a long-haul trucker, always away, while our mother waited tables at the Denny's down the road. Left to ourselves, Mary, June, and I roamed our own wilderness, charting the woods behind our modest house with smudged crayons and construction paper maps. Sun, rain, or snow, we ventured further each time, always back by dinner time, or so we thought. Now I'm not so sure if our mother even noticed how far we'd go or how long we'd be gone. This story is about the lake we found, buried deep in those woods, a place we should never have seen. It was February, cold, brittle, and still. We wore thick, puffy coats and snow pants that made us feel like explorers. After wandering for hours, we stumbled upon a clearing vast and untouched, the world hushed and white as far as the eye could see. The sight was eerie, mesmerizing, so perfect that it felt wrong, like something forbidden. Not a branch, not a track, not a whisper disturbed the flawless snow. It was Mary who spotted the reeds poking along the edges, brittle and brown, their frozen tips still whispering secrets. "There's water under here," she murmured, her sharp eyes studying the ice as she brushed away the snow with a bare, gloved hand. Mary was the clever one, only 12, but with a mind sharp as the winter air. She always asked the questions that made the rest of us uneasy. "How come we've never seen this place?" she asked, glancing around, suspicion in her voice. We'd been here dozens of times, but I had no answer, only a chill prickling at the back of my neck as I pulled my hat tighter over my ears. June was silent, her gaze distant, lost in that empty white. She was different from Mary, softer, gentler. They had the same chestnut waves, the same gray eyes, but I never confused them. Mary questioned, June listened. "That's how it always was. Do you hear that?" June's voice was barely a whisper, her eyes fixed on the edge of the lake, a fear I'd never seen in them before. I strained my ears, but there was nothing, not even a bird or the whisper of branches. "What?" I asked, sensing something wrong, dread curling in my stomach. "Crying," she murmured, lips barely moving. "Someone's crying." Mary straightened up, her breath catching, glancing from the lake to June with a growing urgency. "What are you talking about?" she asked, but June raised a finger, pleading for quiet. The silence pressed down on us, heavy and unnatural, a quiet that soaked into your skin, that made you feel like something was watching. Mary, who could never keep quiet, blinked, her expression one of sudden understanding, a darkness that slid over her like a shadow. "Where's it coming from?" she asked, her voice sharper now, her gaze fixed on the ice. June took a step closer, staring down, her face blank, her eyes hollow, as though something was missing. I'd never seen her like that, a shell empty, as though she'd slipped away and left something cold and wrong in her place. Mary's hands gripped my shoulder, fingers like ice through my jacket. "Stay here," she said, voice barely holding back panic. "June, and you stay. I'm going for help. The Darby boys have a hut back that way, right?" I nodded, though a cold sweat clung to me. Mary tore herself away, her boots leaving jagged prints in the snow as she vanished into the trees, leaving me and June in that deafening silence. June never moved, her eyes fixed on that ice, staring, listening, as if it were calling her. I watched her run until she disappeared between the trees, her boots vanishing in the shadows. When I turned back around, June was already a few feet out onto the lake. My breath caught as I yelled to her, asking what she was doing, telling her it was dangerous. But June didn't answer. She only drifted farther, her figure small and hollow against the endless white. Panic clawed at me, and I tried again, my words trembling, pleading for her to come back. When I heard her name echo back, I realized it was my own voice cracking. Then there was another crack, loud and sharp, splitting the still air. I saw June sink into the ice. One moment, she was there. The next, she was gone, swallowed whole by that black frozen water. My legs turned to lead, and I couldn't move. I wanted to rush to her, to pull her out, but something held me, rooted me there. A coward's fear, maybe. My body felt cold, paralyzed by the shock, while I stood, useless, watching. The seconds felt like hours, the minutes dragging, and I knew it was too late. She'd been under too long. I don't remember when Mary returned with the Darby boys, only that they were there, faces blurring in front of me as I tried to explain what happened, voice choked and breaking. But they didn't believe me. The Darby boys gave each other strange looks, muttering about kids and their wild imaginations, while Mary frowned, pointing back towards the lake. "June's right there," she said, voice steady, finger extended. I turned. The surface was pristine, no hole, no break. And there, at the lake's edge, was June, staring out into the distance, her face pale and eyes dark. She looked the same, but not. She didn't speak as we walked home. There was something unsettling in her silence, her gaze fixed somewhere I couldn't see. Once or twice, I swore I felt her eyes on me, even though every time I looked, she was staring straight ahead. I couldn't help but notice, maybe it was just my imagination, but I thought I saw tiny beads of water clinging to her eyelashes. That day, things started changing. June wasn't the same, not the sister I knew. A few months later, I remember her sitting next to me on the couch when I first noticed a stain on her soft pink sweatpants, a dark blot that spread slowly. She noticed it too, but she didn't get up. She stayed, staring at it, then muttered to herself, almost too quietly, "Guess I'm a woman now, great." After that, she changed even more. She started shaving her legs, wearing tight clothes, painting her face in the bathroom mirror, giving herself a mask I didn't recognize. Soon, she stopped eating lunch with Mary and me. Instead, she sat with girls from big houses, girls who laughed with tight, polished smiles and sipped strawberry vodka stolen from their parents' cabinets. But at night, when the house was dark, she'd come into my room, slipping in like a shadow. She'd sit at the edge of my bed, and sometimes she would just stare, eyes wide and unblinking, almost accusing. Her silence pressed down on me like a weight I couldn't shake. Some nights I'd pretend to sleep, keeping my breath slow and steady, but it never fooled her. She knew. I'd hear her quiet whispers, chilling and strange. "Watch me die, Ryan," she'd murmur, her voice soft, almost coaxing. "You didn't even try to save me." "I'm sorry," I'd choke out, voice muffled against the pillow. I was just scared." Her cold gaze burned through the darkness, a glint I didn't recognize. "You have no idea what it's like. People say drowning is peaceful. They're liars. It feels like barbed wire twisting around your lungs, like a box closing in on you, tighter and tighter, until you're crushed." And she'd lean in, her lips so close to my ear that I could feel her breath, each word dripping with something hollow and wrong. Her hand clamped down on the back of my neck, squeezing just a little too hard, her icy fingers like the chill of first snow. By day, she kept those little chemical hand warmers that skiers use, but not this time. She wanted me to feel the cold, to understand it. It was my fault. "Say you love me, Ryan." "I love you, June." "Good boy." Frank Darby went missing not long after. I was probably the last person to see him alive, or maybe the second to last. I saw him climbing out of June's bedroom window at dusk, his face flushed as he jumped down, my rake frozen midair. I'd only got outside because of the creaks through our thin walls. Sounds I'd never wanted to hear, but there they were, loud and clear. June climbed out after him, grinning far too wide, her hair wild, face still flushed. They shimmied down the big maple beside her window and walked, hand in hand, toward the woods. Just before they slipped into the shadows, June looked over her shoulder and winked. Frank's body turned up a week later. I didn't see it myself, but stories circulated, grim details twisted and retold, warped by town whispers. His throat, they said, was ripped open, ribs cracked and pried apart, as if whatever had killed him had gone straight for his heart. Around that time, my mother fell ill stage 3 breast cancer. I was 12. June and Mary were 15. Mary cried constantly, but June spent most of her time at the hospital, stroking Mom's hair, spooning soup to her, hands pale and ghostly against the hospital sheets. Sometimes I wondered if Mom noticed the cold, wondered what went through her mind as her own strength ebbed away. She died in the middle of the night that spring, and June was the only one there with her. Joe Darby, Frank's younger brother, met a similar fate. His only crime was asking Mary to homecoming. By then, Mary had started wearing thick glasses, and her thrifted dress, vintage and frayed, was something out of another era. They swayed at arm's length, probably smiling awkwardly, I imagined. I wasn't there, but I was there later for the shouting match in the yard. June called Mary names, clawed at her, nails breaking skin as they tumbled to the ground, tearing at each other. Shortly afterward, Joe went missing, and Mary scoured the woods daily, desperate to find him. One day, June joined her on the search, and together they disappeared into the trees, hand in hand. When Mary returned, her hair was damp, and she'd stopped wearing her glasses. A few days later, the police found Joe Darby, or rather pieces of him, shredded beyond recognition. This is a story about a lake in the woods and how my sisters tried to drown me in it. It was a foggy winter morning, the air thick with frost. Across the breakfast table, June and Mary exchanged glances, silent, meaningful. A twin conversation I'd never understand. I was 14, and by then, I was afraid of them both. They asked if I wanted to go on a hike, but I refused. They didn't insist, they didn't need to. Mary had made breakfast, and the sleeping pills must have already started working by then. When the drowsiness hit, I realized too late. I tried to make myself throw up, but my head was already swimming. I remember flashes, branches, sky, the grind of the sled beneath me as they dragged me through the snow. I drifted in and out, snatches of the world above slipping past. When I finally woke, they were there, standing over me, completely naked, grinning with mouths stretched wider than any human should, teeth gleaming white against the cold. The frigid wind whipped through their hair, and they stood unfazed, bare toes dug into the snow. "Can you hear it yet, Ryan?" June's voice, soft and mocking, drifted down to me, her eyes alight with something hollow and hungry. I shook my head, though my blood was frozen in my veins. She chuckled. "I'm sure you will soon. You'll join them, all of them, at the bottom of the lake, screaming for help, begging for mercy. It's a little pathetic, really." I wanted to believe I was dreaming, but I knew I wasn't. The cold bite, the harsh clarity of it, it was too real. My sister should have twisted into something monstrous, claws for hands, fangs jutting around a forked tongue, but they looked just as they always had. The same delicate freckles marking their faces, identical in every other way. Each grabbed one of my arms, lifting me with unnatural strength, moving in perfect tandem, a grim procession to the edge of the lake. I felt like some condemned star of a terrible play. It must have been instinct that finally kicked in when we were halfway to the lake. I thrashed and screamed, knowing no one could hear me. But what else was there to do in the face of death but wail at the heavens for mercy? As my screams cut through the air, something terrible replied. The ground around us seemed to crack open with an eruption of tortured voices rising in a monstrous chorus, every anguished cry boiling up from beneath the earth itself, their wails gathering over the lake. I stared in horror as the lake, once frozen solid, began to froth and churn, steaming as if something ancient and foul had been trapped beneath the ice all this time. My sisters held me fast, lowering me toward the water, feet first. The heat was unbearable, a searing pain that swallowed any sense of hot or cold. It simply burned. Maybe it's poetic that a Darby saved me. Maybe divine intervention, but I tend to think it was just dumb luck. It's hard for me to believe in God anymore. The only thing I know for sure is that evil exists, something dark and twisted that claimed my sisters and has no intention of giving them back. A gunshot rang out just as the water lapped at my knees. June's grip slipped, and with a sudden shift in my weight, I fell backward, wrenching free of Mary's grasp. I crawled, dragging myself inch by inch across the snow, every instinct screaming to get as far from the water as possible. 2 more gunshots cracked above me, piercing the icy air. Glancing up, I saw Helen Darby, the Darby boys' grandmother, an old floral handkerchief tied over her head, clutching a double-barrel shotgun pointed squarely at the lake. I didn't look back, not even when she rushed past me, her footsteps echoing against the frozen ground. Only when I was safe, deep in the woods, did I finally turn to see June's naked body sprawled at the lake's edge, a bullet wound darkening her back, steaming blood soaking into the ground. Mary had disappeared, leaving only the eerie silence of the forest. Helen circled back after a while, bundled me onto the sled, and dragged me to her hunting hut. The rangers came for me in the morning. I lost 3 toes to frostbite and considered myself lucky. After my sisters vanished, Helen became a kind of guardian, especially when my father was gone. She'd come by often, showing me how to cook, use the washing machine, and keep the house running. Mostly though, she'd sit in the living room with that shotgun on her lap, keeping watch through the night, her silent promise that whatever took my sisters would never come for me. On my 15th birthday, she handed me a gun of my own and taught me how to use it. It felt strange, but I pretended it was just her way of honoring her lost grandsons. Maybe she saw something familiar in me. We only talked about that night at the lake once, and never again after that. It was a bitterly cold December night, and we were sitting by the fireplace, listening to the radio drone out a Christmas carol. Helen had been drinking gin straight from the bottle, her eyes wet and her face sagging in that way it only did when she was truly grieving. Finally, her voice broke through the silence. "There's something out there in those woods," she said, her voice barely more than a whisper. "It takes the little girl's hands and kills the men. Been here longer than this town." She paused, staring into the flames. Folks just stopped believing. But we didn't have the luxury of disbelief anymore. I had so many questions, but none would leave my lips. I just stared at Helen, my eyes wide and fixed. She leaned forward, her voice barely a whisper. "It still talks to me," she murmured. "Still points me in its direction. It tried to make me kill my brother, my husband, even my own sons, but I'm too old now. Can't do much beyond talking." She took another long swig from her bottle, eyes clouded with something between terror and surrender. I tried to keep away from it, but look where that got me. Double quotes. She fixed me with a gaze that could pierce through stone. "Someone's got to stay out there," she said, her words heavy with a quiet resignation. "I'm not going to live forever, you know." I nodded, feeling something like a shiver settling into my bones. There was no question in her voice, just a somber decree. "This is a story about how I move into a small cabin deep in the woods. Now I hunt, I fish, and I keep the paths clear, mending what little I can. The voices and screams don't visit me, but some nights, there's a slow, deliberate knocking on the window. I glimpse a shriveled, naked figure, its hair a tangled chestnut mess. One day, I know she likely finished what she started, but until that day, I stand watch. And I pass along the story as best I can, because the worst things happen when you try to forget the warnings of another time. Don't wander too far. Don't stray from the path. Something evil still waits out there. And just like it got me, it may find you too."